So today I'm going to talk about meditation and explain to you what I do to meditate. I figure I'd best talk about myself rather than anybody else. So I ended up beginning my meditation practice here at IBMC in 1978-79, right in this very room here. And it was really uncomfortable because you had to sit quietly and suffer. And my instruction at that point was just sit down and try to relax and count your breath. And everything else will happen by itself. So that was my beginning. I sat down and tried to count my breath and found that it was much more difficult than I had expected because my mind kept wanting to think about something more interesting than breathing. And it was like an hour and a half. We had 25 minutes, 5-minute break, 25 minutes, 5-minute break, 25 minutes, 5-minute break. And then Shinzen was the vice abbot at that time, and then he would give a talk. And what I found was that it was just really too long for me to meditate. So I tried to push through it and failed miserably. So that was the beginning of my meditation practice, and I would encourage everybody to have a good sense of humor if they decide they want to meditate. I also started off with sort of mindfulness meditation and, being aware of sensation and that kind of stuff. And it didn't work very well for me because I became agitated as my clarity became clear. And I started to see things around me that I didn't like. There was no way to either prevent me from seeing them or wanting them to be different than they were, and then there was that inner struggle, and so it was really difficult. So I figured that mindfulness meditation wasn't my kind of meditation, that I needed to do something that would give me a peace and happiness and not clarity. So that's when I discovered Samatha meditation. Now, to go back, we have 44 different kinds of meditation that we can do as a Buddhist. We have 40 kinds of meditation that allow us to feel comfortable and find bliss and happiness. And we have 4 kinds of meditation that will give us direct insight into the true nature of reality. Now, the true nature of reality can be summed up as anicca, dukkha, anatta. And that means impermanence, suffering, and not self. So that's the true nature of our reality, and it takes a really long time to appreciate the subtle aspects of that because it's not a very pleasant way of looking at the world. And you always wish it could be better than it is, and of course it never is. But Samatha meditation allows you to sort of have this cocoon of samadhi that wraps around you. And as all this information comes speeding at you, it hits that cocoon and it slows down, and it's like molasses. And it allows you to understand at a much different level and at a slower level, and a way to integrate that understanding and make it wisdom and not simply just suffering. So when we talk about Samatha meditation, oftentimes it includes the topic of Jhana. So let me explain Jhana to you briefly. There are 4 jhanas that deal with form and 4 jhanas that deal with formlessness. I'm going to speak about the 4 jhanas that deal with form. They have 5 characteristics, the 4 jhanas. The characteristics are applied thought, sustained thought, happiness, bliss, and equanimity. And it sort of works like this. You sit down and you cross your legs and you start to come to the sensation of breath. And if you hold your breath there, applied thought and sustained thought, you go deeper and deeper into one-pointedness. When you start going into one-pointedness, what you see is a greater sense of pleasure, physical pleasure, a greater sense of mental happiness, and a greater sense of balance or equanimity. If you continue to simply focus on your object of meditation and go deeper, you get rid of applied thought and sustained thought. Now your mind simply rests on the object of meditation, and you have a greater sense of pleasure, physical, a greater sense of happiness, mental, and a greater sense of balance or equanimity. If you continue, if you have enough time and inclination to continue, you are now faced with the dilemma of having to let something go. And what I found interesting about Buddhist meditation is it's never about gaining anything. It's about getting rid of the stuff that prevents you from experiencing your perfection. Okay, so how do you get rid of pleasure? Well, it's really difficult to get rid of pleasure because it feels so good. But maybe we could get rid of pain, because pain is the other side of pleasure. And maybe we could deny ourselves pain if we figured out what pain was. And pain turns out to be a label of a very strong sensation. Now, the really strong sensation doesn't have pain or pleasure connected to it. It's the way we interpret it. And perhaps with greater confidence and concentration, we can say, I am not going to be moved or motivated by the pain. I'm simply going to experience the sensation behind the pain and see what that means. So pain becomes a problem, pleasure becomes an attachment, and sensation just is. So, how many sensations do we have? We have 3 sensations: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And the idea is to turn both the pleasure and the pain into neutral. To sit with balance and equanimity, not be moved by it. So there we are, we're sitting with the pain, we recognize it's a sensation, we start to focus on the sensation, and now there's 2 things we can do. We can either become the pain, which is really difficult. If you become the pain, then the pain no longer exists because you're no longer separate from it. It's no longer dualistic. But that is something that the best meditation masters do, not the ones like me. So the other way to deal with the pain is to be focused so much on your object of meditation that there's no room for the pain or sensation to exist. Because we can only do one thing at a time, theoretically. We can do them really fast, and it seems like we're doing them at the same time. So now I'm going to be focused on my object of meditation with such intensity that the pain doesn't have a chance to catch my attention. In the same way, if we're in a movie studio or movie house, 1940. We're in a 1940 movie house, and there's an action scene on the screen. It can pull us right into the screen, and nothing else exists. Our feet, our arms, our head, laughter, nothing else exists except for that screen. And that's how intense you want your focus to be on the object of meditation. You've succeeded. You've gone into the next jhana. Now we've only got 2 characteristics to deal with: happiness and equanimity. Now the problem with happiness is it's always attached to sadness, and it disturbs the mind, it disturbs the peace of the mind. And can we understand that if we give up the happiness, we give up the sadness, and we come to a place of balance? Now, having said giving up pleasure, having said giving up happiness, it's we give up the attachment to pleasure, we give up the attachment to happiness. Because happiness will arise, sadness will arise, pain will arise, pleasure will arise, but do we have to follow that with aversion or attachment? As it turns out, we don't. The mind of balance, the mind of equanimity, not the mind of indifference, but the mind of equanimity, allows us to experience all the sensations, mental and physical, and not attach or not have aversion. The problem with attachment and aversion, as you all know, is it leads to suffering. So there's nothing in pleasure that will give us suffering other than the attachment to it. There's nothing in pain that will give us suffering other than the aversion to it. Do we have a choice when it comes to pain? Well, we don't, unless you have health insurance. Do we have a choice when it comes to suffering? Yes, we do. Buddhism says suffering is optional. So here we have gone through this maze of pain and pleasure, happiness and sadness, applied thought and sustained thought, and we end up in the deepest state of concentration called the fourth jhana, and now there's only one characteristic left, and it is balance, and it is equanimity, and it is neither aversion nor attachment. At that point, at that moment, suffering no longer exists for us. It can't arise. Cool. But now, Reverend Shanti rings the gong, meditation is over, we get up, we walk out the door, and suffering materializes again. So the Buddha found that was a problem. He wanted to make it permanent, not temporary. And that's when he went over into mindfulness meditation, insight meditation, 4 kinds: mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of sensations, mindfulness of the mind, and mindfulness of mental objects. We have those 4 aspects of mindfulness meditation, and that will allow us to see with great clarity impermanence, suffering, and not self. And that's how I thought it worked. Until I found a PDF online written by Bhante Gunaratana called Analysis of the Jhanas in Theravada Buddhist Meditation. This was his doctor's thesis. It's available on Urban Dharma if you have any interest at all. And what he stated in this I thought was fascinating. When we are doing mindfulness meditation, whether it be mind or mental objects, body or sensations, we have the opportunity of seeing those 3 aspects of Buddhist wisdom: anicca, dukkha, anatta, permanence, suffering, not self. But he said we also, in jhana meditation, can use the qualities of jhana to see impermanence, suffering, and not self. Up until I read that, I had read no other book or paper that said it is possible to achieve liberation through jhanic meditation. It was always temporary and profound. So we can achieve nirvana in samatha meditation, and we can achieve nirvana in vipassana, mindfulness meditation. We have 2 paths to go. I chose the path of jhana because I found it to be more conducive to happiness and bliss than mindfulness. In my own opinion, from my own experience, I have found people that deal with mindfulness meditation to be a bit dry, to have lost their sense of humor. They're analytical, and they are comparing and analyzing, and they have opinions about everything. But that's how the mind works, and the idea is to look at everything as being unsatisfactory, not to get attached to it, not to have aversion towards it, to see the pitfalls of being normal. In Samatha meditation, the people seem to have just a better view of the world. They realize that it's just the way it is, and there is some good stuff and there's some bad stuff, and this samatha will transform one's consciousness to allow acceptance of it, rather than to have to define it and assimilate it. No definition necessary. It's simply the experience of everyday life that becomes available to you through this state of mind. Now the Buddha said, profoundly so, that the entire world exists in this fathom-long body. Fathom is fingertip to fingertip. Some fathoms are longer than others. In this fathom-long body, we have the entire world. What that meant to me was that we have the choice of creating our world, of making it better or worse, depending on how we're feeling that day, that moment, that hour. It's up to us. The world just is, and we are in the world interpreting it, and we create the world we live in. And so when you see people having a bad day, they're sort of in the hell realm. I was at Vaughn's supermarket yesterday. I saw quite a few people in the hell realm, just wandering around, suffering. And then when you get on Vermont Avenue, everybody's in the hell realm. But you don't have to be now, because you've got a choice. You understand how it works. You understand that it can be any way you want it to be. There's an accountability to your world now that you have started to meditate and seen how it is created moment by moment. My own personal meditation has evolved from mindfulness to samatha to something called just sitting. And this is a rather odd way of meditating. And it's in the Japanese Zen tradition, and they call it shikantaza. And this is what I've come to prefer after many years of meditation. Jhanic meditation was fascinating, but took a lot of energy. And it just changed the whole way you looked at the world. And so that's sort of an evolutionary process I found. Mindfulness meditation was an analytical process, but shikantaza is just being in the world, just simply sitting and letting everything happen with no aversion or no attachment. To be like a transparent pane of glass. And when the helicopters fly over, it's simply sound that's vibrating. As soon as you turn it into a helicopter, it becomes something else. But when you don't turn it into a helicopter and turn it into sound, or a sensation, it's really hot or it's really cold, there's a breeze, there's no breeze, these are all raw sensations before the story, before we add our signature to it, before we make it our life. So just sitting allows you to be in the present moment without a story. And it's refreshing, to say the least. Because we all have stories, and some are really long stories. Some of them have just terrible parts and wonderful parts. But none of it is actually real anymore. It's fragmented memories of how it was or how it may have been, and it's hopes and desires for how it could be. And here we sit in the middle, wanting it to be this in the future and regretting it was that in the past. But when those hopes and desires and regrets fall away and you come to the present moment experience, it's a breath of fresh air. Because it's no way in particular. It has no value particularly. It's not a good present moment or a bad present moment. It just sort of is, and there you sit, experiencing through your sense doors what creates you and the story of your life. That profound detachment from the process and the event allows you to have a small vacation, because it will reestablish itself as soon as you move as soon as you go to the door. The story comes back. We are somebody. We need to do something. We need to go somewhere. Until that happens, though, the story doesn't have to work. So, I like having a story. I like being the creator of my story. But I also like taking a vacation from my story. And not having to be me for 20 minutes or a half hour. And just sort of relaxing. And then people will help create you. They'll say, hi, how are you? And I say, I think I'm okay. And then they'll start building you up into something that they expect you to be. And then you start building yourself up into something you want to be. Usually those two are in conflict. And then life continues. So meditation is a way of becoming free. Meditation is a way of finding your choice. Meditation is a way of creating your world. And if your world is based on clarity and kindness, everyone in your world will benefit because of what you do. So I would encourage everybody to meditate and suffer and have pleasure and have sadness and have happiness and enjoy the process of being a human being. Because in the next lifetime, we may not have that luxury. Who knows? Thank you for listening. Does anybody have any comments or questions they'd like to ask about what I've talked about? Or would anybody like to share? Yes?
Well, you said in Samatha you have an object of meditation.
Yes.
What is that?
Well, there are 40 kinds of Samatha meditation. So one of the objects of meditation could be the Buddha, and you would reflect on the qualities of the Buddha. Now they say reflecting on the qualities of the Buddha will not get you enlightened, but it will allow you to be reborn in heaven, which ain't a bad deal, you know? And there's something called the I can't remember the name now. It'll come to me though. There are kasinas. Kasinas. So we have the fire kasina, we have the earth kasina, and for instance, the fire kasina. What you could do is in the old days they took like a piece of cloth, and they would cut a hole in it, and they would build a fire. And they would put this piece of cloth with a hole in front of the fire, and then you'd sit looking through the hole at the fire. And you would repeat, fire, fire, fire. And then you close your eyes to see if you could see the fire. And after an appropriate amount of time, you could close your eyes and see the fire exactly how it is. Then the idea was to take that fire and make it really big as the universe inside your head. Big as the universe. Then take the giant fire and make it as small as an atom. Then you would have the ability to go into a deep state of tranquility and happiness. Now, Dharmakaya is a Buddhist monastery in Azusa, and they do that kind of meditation. Oftentimes you'll see they have something, a globe, a ball, a crystal ball in front of them on a pedestal, and they'll be looking at that. And they'll want to take that ball off the pedestal into their head and bring it to the belly. So I asked one of the monks, I said, how long did it take you to get the ball from the pedestal to the belly? He said 10 years. That's how long it took. But you look at their faces, and basically they're very calm and relaxed and happy. Samatha meditation is a powerful way of transforming the mind. But oftentimes not taught because there are a lot of problems that can arise because you're dealing with the mind. So you have to be, oh, what's the word, Kui? We have to be normal. And I don't know, I look around LA and there's probably 12 people that should do Samatha meditation. And because it can expand your neurosis. If you're psychotic, it can make you even worse. You can do it. It can go the other way too. So you have to find a teacher. The teacher interviews you. You have to find a particular place to do samatha meditation. They say in a cave or under a tree. You can't be distracted by worldly duties. You have to. There's a whole series of things you need to do before you even start to meditate. And so the best way to do it, of course, would to be a monk in a monastery where you have a controlled environment. And if problems came up, you'd have teachers who understood what the problems were, who could help you. So the kasina, for me, was just a fascinating idea. I've never met anybody who used that, but when I went to Dharmakaya and saw the crystal balls, I went, yeah, very cool. I hope that answered your question. I forget what the question is now. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
You spoke of reaching one through heaven, and you mentioned enlightenment. What's the difference between those two meditations, reaching to heaven and enlightenment?
Yeah. Not every kind of meditation gets you enlightened. Enlightenment would be, according to Theravada Buddhism, not suffering, number one, the end of karma, number two, and not being reborn, number three. Now the reason we don't want to be reborn is because every time you're born, you have to get sick, you have to get old if you live long enough, and then you have to die. And you go through that time and time and time again, and at some point in one of your lifetimes, you may say, I am so tired of being born, of getting old, of getting sick and dying, that I'd like to achieve nirvana and exist in a unique way this time. The heaven realm for a Buddhist is not forever. The heaven realm is temporary, but it is a very long temporary. Some say 100,000 human lifetimes is one lifetime in heaven. The problem with heaven in Buddhism is ultimately you have to leave. And you're in the perfect place. You don't want to go. And then they kick you out, and then you go through all the cycles of rebirth and death again. And maybe through good karma and good actions, you end up in heaven again for a really long time. But that'll get old too. So every form of Buddhism ultimately has as its end nirvana. The end of suffering, the end of karma, the end of all future rebirth. In Mahayana Buddhism, what they say is the ideal is to be a bodhisattva, to be reborn time and time again in the human realm so you can be of service to those who suffer, which turns out to be everybody. So they choose, rather than going to heaven, they choose rather than going to nirvana, they choose to be reborn in the human realm forever. Because that's how long it's going to take for everybody to end their suffering. So we have a variety of things to do, a variety of places to go. And it's just a matter of choosing which one works for you. So if I don't make it to nirvana in this lifetime, I'm headed, hopefully, to heaven. So I can take a break and relax. And then come back and start again. Did that make sense, sort of?
Well, you had said something else. It's bodhisattva. You said bodhisattva, right?
Yes.
There's three kinds of bodhis, or four kinds, and one renounces itself and comes back and helps his fellow man.
Yes.
Instead of going on to heaven or going on to enlightenment.
Yes. Yeah, that's called a bodhisattva, and it's a very interesting path to take. A lot of people prefer that path. In the Mahayana tradition, now two kinds of Buddhism basically, Theravada and Mahayana. Theravada is early Buddhism, the more orthodox approach, and Mahayana Buddhism is the Reform movement. Those are the Protestants, if you will. Within the Mahayana, you also have Vajrayana, which are the Tibetan Buddhists. So in Mahayana, bodhisattva, being of service, enlightenment rather than nirvana. In early Buddhism, as my teacher used to say, if you have a chance to get nirvana, take it. Because it may not happen again for a really long time. So two different approaches to that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? I guess not. Well, thank you for coming today. And have a safe and happy 4th of July.